Once upon a time, there was a sweet little girl who everyone called Little Red Riding Hood. She got her name from the beautiful red velvet cap her grandmother had made for her, which she loved to wear everywhere.
Grandma is unwell, sweetheart. I've baked her some treats. Would you be a dear and take them to her?
Little Red Riding Hood was a kind and helpful girl, so she readily agreed. She put on her favorite red cap and skipped out the door, her basket laden with goodies for her grandmother. The path to grandmother's house led through a forest, but Little Red Riding Hood wasn't afraid. She knew the woods well, and she loved listening to the birds sing and watching the squirrels chase each other up the trees.
Of course, Mother, I'll take them right away.
As Little Red Riding Hood skipped along, her mother's parting words echoed in her ears.
Stay on the path, darling, and don't talk to strangers.
Little Red Riding Hood nodded, remembering her mother's advice. The sun shone through the leaves, dappling the path with light and shadow. The birds sang their cheerful songs, and the world felt full of magic. Suddenly a twig snapped in the undergrowth, startling Little Red Riding Hood. She stopped and looked around, her heart beating a little faster. A dark shadow seemed to move through the trees, but she couldn't see anyone.
What was that?
"Hello there, little one," a gruff voice boomed from behind a large oak tree. Little Red Riding Hood gasped and spun around to see a large wolf, its fur the color of midnight, staring at her with hungry eyes. Despite her fear, Little Red Riding Hood remembered her manners. She said, clutching her basket a little tighter. "S1, good morning, sir."
What are you doing in the woods all by yourself?
I'm going to visit my grandmother. She isn't feeling well.
The wolf listened intently, its sharp eyes never leaving her face.
What a thoughtful granddaughter you are. Why don't you pick some wildflowers for your grandmother? It would brighten her day, don't you think?
Little Red Riding Hood hesitated, torn between her mother's warning and the wolf's suggestion. The wolf seemed friendly enough, and the wildflowers were so beautiful. Surely it wouldn't hurt to pick a few, she thought. Unbeknownst to Little Red Riding Hood, the cunning wolf had a wicked plan brewing in its mind. It watched as the little girl innocently wandered off the path, lured by the colorful blooms.
That sounds like a lovely idea.
"Who is it?" came a frail voice from inside. "Narrator." As soon as Little Red Riding Hood was out of sight, the wolf dashed towards grandmother's house. It reached the cottage before long and knocked gently on the door.
It's me, Little Red Riding Hood, Granny, the wolf called out, mimicking the little girl's voice as best as it could.
The grandmother, unsuspecting of any danger, unlatched the door. In a flash, the wolf pushed its way inside, bolted the door shut, and gobbled up the poor grandmother in one gulp. The cunning wolf, disguised in grandmother's nightgown and bonnet, crept into bed and pulled the covers up to its chin. It chuckled to itself, pleased with its clever plan. Now, it only had to wait for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive.
Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood finally reached her grandmother's cottage, her basket overflowing with colorful wildflowers. She knocked softly on the door, a little worried about her grandmother.
Come in, dear, the wolf rasped, doing its best to sound like the grandmother.
Little Red Riding Hood pushed open the door and peered into the dimly lit room.
"Hello, Granny," she said, approaching the bed. "I brought you some treats and wildflowers." "My, what big eyes you have, Granny," Little Red Riding Hood exclaimed, a puzzled look on her face.
All the better to see you with, my dear, the wolf chuckled.
"And Granny, what big hands you have," Little Red Riding Hood said, taking a step closer to the bed.
"All the better to hug you with, my dear," the wolf growled, licking its chops in anticipation. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the cottage. The door burst open, and a burly hunter stood in the doorway, his rifle aimed at the wolf. The hunter had been tracking the wolf for days and had heard Little Red Riding Hood's cries for help. With a deafening roar, the hunter shot the wicked wolf. To everyone's surprise, out popped Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother, unharmed but a little shaken. The hunter had arrived just in time.
Little Red Riding Hood threw her arms around her grandmother, overjoyed to see her safe. She apologized for not listening to her mother's warnings and promised never to talk to strangers again, especially not wolves in the woods.
The hunter helped them gather stones, which they used to fill the wolf's belly, preventing its escape. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson about listening to her elders and the importance of staying safe.